Hi there, I'm Zach Kircher, and you're watching Kircher Talks Entertainment. If you're a gamer, then you'll most likely agree that 2025 was simultaneously one of the worst years for gaming, but also one of the best. I guess it kind of depends on how you look at things, because if all you care about are AAA games, then it was a complete disaster. But if you were into indie and AA gaming, then you were in absolute heaven last year. For me, I just like a good game that doesn't waste my time, regardless if it came from a big or small studio. In any case, 2025 had a lot to offer for pretty much every kind of gamer, including myself, and today I'm eager to share the games that I enjoyed the most from 2025. As usual for these kinds of videos though, I'm not just talking about like 2025 releases that I played, I'm talking about every single game that I played through last year. But before we get into the actual top 10 though, here are a few games that I don't know if I would necessarily call honorable mentions, but either way, they just weren't quite good enough to make the cut. For this first one, if you would have told me that Doom the Dark Ages wouldn't have made it onto my top 10 for this year, I would have thought you were crazy, considering that Doom Eternal was like, I don't know, 2 or 3 for the year that came out. Yeah, it was fun enough for me to play all the way through and obtain the Platinum Trophy for, but for all that id Software did to innovate, I feel like they overcorrected too much. By placing a little too much emphasis on customizable difficulty, quote-unquote storytelling, and gimmicky combat sections like the mech levels, the root experience that I came to love in the previous 2 Doom games was very much muddled here. But I still enjoyed it overall, and I don't regret playing it. A game that I'm a little less enthusiastic about is The House of Da Vinci 2, which is the sequel to a first-person puzzle game that my wife and I played the year prior. While its puzzles are slightly more clever and interesting this time around, once again it still faces the same problems of the original, and that it thinks its story is a lot more interesting than what it actually is, and oftentimes the solutions to the puzzles are so obscure that once I actually look up the solution to what I need to do, I'm like, okay, like, how was I supposed to figure that out exactly? I don't know. I mean, at this point, I don't think I'd be really interested in finishing off this trilogy. Now, out of the 3 games that I've mentioned thus far, a little to the left is the simplest, but also the most purely enjoyable. This cozy puzzle game from Canadian studio Max Inferno is themed around decluttering and reorganizing various objects, and it often served as a peaceful way for my wife and I to wind down for bed after a long day. Like with the previous game though, there are a handful of puzzles that are very abstract and can be quite frustrating unless you dare to look at the hints that they provide you. Still, I mean, it's a compact, fun experience, and I would be open to trying out the next game that these people make. Alright, now that those are out of the way, let's get into the actual top 10. We'll start with Number 10! Back in 2021, It Takes Two was my favorite game that year. It was inevitable then that my wife and I would play Hazelight Studios' next co-op exclusive title, Split Fiction. I'll admit that I don't like it anywhere near as much as It Takes Two, primarily because the story is just not as naturally compelling as you and your partner working out the kinks of a broken marriage through gameplay, and the dialogue is often very cringe. The quips that the main characters Zoe and Mio make are like if you distilled every stereotype that people have for Marvel humor into 2 people. At least the game makes up for it by being an absolutely insane amount of different mechanics and crazy level variety that you get in every single chapter, especially since you are frequently jumping between fantasy and sci-fi settings with similar aesthetics, but things are changed enough to where not every single level feels the same, and the gameplay is so fleshed out that it feels like you're playing a completely different video game every time. Even if the story is not much to really write home about, which is ironic considering that the main 2 characters are 2 writers trying to prevent their stories from being stolen, even so, Split Fiction is still worth checking out for how much of an insane thrill ride it is. Number 9! After how disappointing the last 2 Indiana Jones movies were, this is intolerable! I was bracing for Indiana Jones and the Great Circle to be another letdown in this long-running franchise, but honestly, I think this game fits quite well with the other movies that came out in the 80s. A critical reason for that is just how well Machine Games absolutely nailed the vibe of Indiana Jones, both for the character himself as well as every identifiable feature that you would find in Spielberg's original movies. It all starts with how Troy Baker just absolutely crushed his performance as Indiana Jones, 90s. It's not even like Troy Baker playing indie. It's almost like they traveled back in time to the 80s and when Harrison Ford was in his absolute hotness prime, and then snatched him back, forced him to record some lines, and then sent him back to the past. It's that crazy how good his performance is. Beyond that, I love that the game was designed in such a way that it focuses on Indiana Jones as a scholar and archaeologist, rather than a guy who gets by the skin of his teeth. Contained, carefully crafted environments with tons of puzzles, collectibles, and items that unlock secret locations have made for some of my favorite video games of all time, so it was fun to experience that same kind of gameplay design philosophy framed in the context of Indiana Jones, trying to outsmart the Nazis and the fascists, at one point even the Japanese army. I really appreciated that this game made me work for the solutions to all of these puzzles too. They were difficult and encouraged critical thinking, which was a breath of fresh air for a game that was made with mass market appeal. It's such a fun adventure to go on with indie that feels right at home with the spirit of those original movies, although I do think it will be an acquired taste. Unlike the movies that are definitely full of action and excitement and paced well enough to where there's a good mix between the action and the slower paced sleuthing type stuff, this game is more about the in-between stuff that indie does to progress the story. Combat is more akin to something like Dishonored, where you try to use every tool in your arsenal to be stealthy. That in and of itself has its appeal, and it's fun to sneak around, especially, as you're trying to snag people with Indie's whip. But I think that the way the game design discourages traditional styles of video game combat resulted in the game not being as fun as it could have been, considering how much it tried to emulate the feeling of the movies otherwise. I mean, I could forgive that problem since I love the exploration stuff so much. The real reason this game is as low on the list as it is because it is very buggy, and to the point that it actually kind of pissed me off. You see, I really enjoyed exploring places like the Vatican, Giza, and Sukhothai so much that I was really gunning for that platinum trophy. And I almost got it. I was very intent on obtaining that thing, but the problem is that there were times that bugs resulted in me having to reload my save file in order to, actually progress, and it caused some backtracking here and there. Forgivable, but annoying, nobody likes to do that. But eventually when I got to Sukhothai, there was a point where a glitch occurred after obtaining the Royal Army uniform, where after changing back to Indy's regular outfit in order to progress the story, I was soft-locked into Indy's outfit that I couldn't change back into the other one. And there were areas that required me to be in the Royal Army uniform, and so it's basically the game's fault that I wasn't able to complete the platinum as it had been designed to be done. And believe me, I scoured a whole bunch of Reddit forums to find every possible fix that I could, but I just ended up wasting my time.
Don't waste my mother time!
So, even though I still finished the campaign and enjoyed my time with it, I'll always be annoyed that this game didn't have those glitches figured out to where I could experience all that the game had to offer for me, and so just be aware that, yes, I think this is a game that's worth playing and I wholeheartedly recommend it to you, but buyers beware. Glitches like the one that I described to you can be frustrating, so watch out for them.
Number 8!
Now, speaking of games that are based on George Lucas's ideas, there were some games from my childhood that I revisited last year to see if they held up, and this is one of those that was worthy enough to appear on the list. It took some YouTube tutorials and troubleshooting on my PC settings in order to get it to work with Windows 11, but once it did, playing this game in full high definition and with a high frame rate, and with controls that were customized to work with a twin-stick controller as opposed to whatever that was, it was glorious. Listen, as much as I cherish my memories with the Nintendo 64 growing up, playing games from that era with updated hardware and controls is a dream come true. Something just hit different about Star Wars games from the 90s and early 2000s, because I mean, that was at the peak of George Lucas's merchandising era with the special editions and then the prequel movies, and so you got a lot of stinkers.
What a piece of junk.
But then you got gems like this that really were just a joy to play around in the sandbox with. As a kid, I spent a lot of time trying to master each level so that I could easily get the gold medal in each and every single mission. But now as an adult, I can just appreciate that each mission has its own unique flavor and rhythm to them, regardless of whether I even meet the criteria to get the gold medal. Although, flying the Naboo Starfighter to get those medals certainly does help. I also credit this game for giving me the belief that the X-Wing is the coolest spaceship ever created. I mean, just listen to this one line that describes what the X-Wing is all about.
The Incom T-65 X-Wing is the fighter that killed the Death Star.
I mean, doesn't that just make this thing sound like the sexiest accomplishment in aerospace engineering ever? I digress. This game is still very fun to play to this day, but what I find lacking about it is that the missions don't really amount to that much of a cohesive story. They all just kind of blur together as these various rescue, escort, and sabotage missions that Rogue Squadron does in between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, in which the background storytelling and connective tissue are little more than means to an end to just get the player from one mission to the next. I also wish that the game was longer, for if you just play through each mission once and that's it, I mean, you're pretty much done with the game in a matter of a few hours. That doesn't stop it from being a classic of flight combat games though, and I will look forward to replaying it even more in the future.
Number 7.
Resident Evil.
I'm not going to say much on this since I am planning a series of videos where I talk about each of the main Resident Evil games leading up to Requiem, considering that I've never played any of them. Well, aside from this one. Needless to say, even though I already owned physical copies of a couple of these games, I picked up the remainder for dirt cheap around Halloween time last year, so once I got all of those games, I made a commitment to playing them all from that point forward, starting with this game. This 2002 remake of the original Resident Evil was rough for a few reasons, but overall, I had a great time with it. Like I said with Indiana Jones, I really love games set in contained locations but are dense with puzzles and secrets. Resident Evil gave me exactly that while also letting me fight genuinely scary monsters. Need I say more?
Number 6.
Fellas, I did it. After 3 separate attempts to play through it from beginning to end over the past maybe, I don't know, decade or so, I have finally beaten the one 3D Zelda game that I have never played through to the end. Majora's Mask. Man, it feels so good to say that after so long. I mean, it's like I actually have gamer cred now or something, especially since I honestly think this is my favorite video game franchise ever. While I still prefer Breath of the Wild, Ocarina of Time, and Twilight Princess, I'd rank Majora's Mask like smack dab in the middle of all the 3D Zelda titles, which is to say that I still really loved it. I think the reason it took me so long to clear this game is because it's an acquired taste. I mean, the other 3D Zelda games are either very linear and straightforward with how you progress through the campaign, and then you have a couple that are so open-ended that pretty much every path you take is viable. Majora's Mask is different because its approach to level design is much more abstract and inherently challenging. The world of Termina may be small, but this 3-day time loop of Link trying to prevent the moon from crashing into the world always loomed in the back of my head as I tried to clear the main objectives leading up to each of the 4 dungeons, and then beating said dungeons. Originally, my approach for pretty much everything was just to play the inverted Song of Time and then cram as much into that period of shortened time as I could. It certainly worked for those key objectives, but not so much for the side quests or the secrets. But man, once I really figured out things like how the 3-day cycle truly works, paying attention to all the hints with the gossip stones, and then learning the routines of all the side characters within the Bomber's Notebook, it was like night and day. It pretty much changed everything for me. It turned what was, a really pretty fun and unique Zelda game into one of the most satisfying gameplay loops in the series. Gradually getting stronger and obtaining more items in order to get the most efficient path possible to help everyone possible was a joyful experience in and of itself. Groundhog Day is one of my favorite movies, so it was only natural for me to gravitate towards a time loop story like this, where learning more and more about how to be a better servant of the people, that really meant something to me. It also goes without saying that Majora's Mask builds upon an already rock-solid foundation that Ocarina of Time provided it, and it did so by shaking things up with the various mask abilities, as well as featuring some of the best dungeons in the whole series. Eventually, when I come back to this game again, which who knows when that will be, but I'll be eager to see if knowing the intricacies of this world and how they all mesh together will make for even more satisfying playthroughs.
Number 5.
Age of Empires is the other game from my childhood that I revisited this past year. I put so many hours into this game as a kid, both on my parents' desktop computer and eventually a hand-me-down work laptop from my dad, in which this, alongside the original StarCraft, were fundamental for my love of strategy games. I'm nowhere near good enough at them to compete online, because for all I know I'd probably get my butt handed to me by some kid in South Korea, but the gameplay loop of building a base, developing an efficient resource economy, raising an army, and then setting up a defense grid will never get old to me. Even with the fact that in the original Age of Empires, pretty much all of the units and the buildings are the same aside from like very slight aesthetic differences. That was all good fun when I was younger, but now that I'm an adult, the game has taken on a new meaning for me because it's kind of become the game that I typically gravitate to whenever I set my daughter down for an afternoon nap on the weekends. Typically what will happen is I take her on a drive to put her to sleep, which I'm actually going to do as soon as I'm done recording this, and then once I get home and she's, of course asleep, I'll lay her in the bed next to my desk and then play Age of Empires for a couple of hours before she eventually wakes up. There's a certain comfort in that, since the game is just chill enough to where I can feel relaxed while my daughter is just resting a few feet to my right. I can imagine you gamer dads and moms will know what I'm talking about. I know that Age of Empires 2 is the better game, and I certainly have put time into that one as well, but I'll always be nostalgic for the original, since it was just the game I grew up with, I'm sure I'll continue to enjoy it for many more years in the future as well.
Number 4.
There are a handful of games in my collection that I would call forever games. These kinds of games are ones that I could easily pick up anytime and enjoy, no matter what mood I'm in. I mentioned Age of Empires earlier, and that's certainly one of them. Another example would be the original Star Wars Battlefront 2. And yet another game that I can lump into this list as of 2025 is Balatro. I slept on this when it originally came out, partially since cursory glances at the game just made it look like some kind of lame mobile game that didn't really seem appealing to me. But when it became free to download on PS Plus summer of last year, both me and my brother-in-law were like, sure, why not? Oh boy, once I did that, I realized that I had been judging this book by its cover hardcore. For those of you who don't know how Balatro works, you play hands of poker to try to score enough points in order to advance to the next round. Your score is determined like this. Let's say that you're dealt a hand that has a full house, which is basically a combo of a 3 of a kind and a pair. At its base level, this hand gives you 40 chips multiplied by 4, resulting in a score of 160. But your score is also affected by counting up the number of chips that your played hand is worth. If that full house from earlier has 3 10s and 2 8s, then now my multiplier is 86 chips multiplied by 4, resulting in a score of 344. Where things really get crazy is that Balatro also has 150 unique Joker cards that twist up the rules of the game, such as increasing the amount of chips or multiplication that a played hand can give me. In that example from earlier, if I have the Gros Michel Joker, which increases the multiplication by 15, and the Even Steven Joker, which adds 4 multiplication per every even-numbered card that I play, now my multiplier is 86 chips multiplied by 39, resulting in a score of 3,354. Now do you see why this game can be pretty addicting? Trust me when I say that while you certainly could do the math like how I just did, you really don't have to enjoy this game, because the real fun and excitement from it comes from experimenting with the different Jokers, finding a gameplay loop that works with you, and then just seeing what sticks. Balatro strikes that very fine balance for a card-based roguelike, which certainly rewards skill, but it also takes a little bit of chance. Not every run of this game will win, and that's okay. The game is just so easy to pick up and enjoy at a moment's notice that a 10-minute play session can be just as fun as a 3-hour one. And that's why I'm not only calling it one of my forever games, but also one of my favorite games of 2025. And ironically enough, for as much as the solo developer Local Thunk has been transparent about his hatred for gambling, he sure made a game that is hard to rip one's hands from. If anything, it proved to me that it's a good thing that I never got into actual gambling. Thank you, Balatro.
Number 3.
Several years back, I picked up the Mass Effect Legendary Edition shortly after it launched and subsequently played the first game. If I'm being honest though, I wasn't really that impressed by it. Despite how entertaining the story was, the side content was so repetitive and dull that I just didn't feel motivated to continue on, at least at the time. About a year ago, I decided to finally jump into the other two games, and now I'm kicking myself for not playing them sooner. Both the second and third installments are significant improvements over the original in pretty much every single way you could think of. Well, I take that back. The second game had its own very repetitive minigame with like the planetary scan mechanic thing. At least it had some use in that I got to eat up more lore about the universe each time I discovered a planet, and I was able to harvest enough resources that I cleared every possible upgrade in the game, and then had some resources left over for the war effort in the third installment. Anyway, the way that I view these games is this. Mass Effect 2 is the absolute peak of BioWare's storytelling and quest design, and Mass Effect 3 perfected the combat, pacing, mission structure, and truly delivered on being a climax to the story. The second game in particular has this wonderful adventurous spirit to it where I loved recruiting so many enigmatic individuals for the suicide mission against the Collectors, and there was an incredible sense of satisfaction that I got from seeing them all live to fight another day by the end. That was a very well-earned platinum trophy for sure. And even with the third game, I don't get the hate for it at all. I love it just as much as the second one. Sure, the way that the Elusive Man's character arc was handled wasn't as satisfying as it could have been, and the, shall we say, choice Commander Shepard has to make at the end feels a little bit like a jump the shark moment, but I was so invested by the whole experience that those issues did not overshadow how much I loved this entire story. And yes, Garrus was pretty much always on my party. I mean, why wouldn't he be? He's my boy. Tally, James, and one of the Krogans usually ended up being my other wingman. This was a very satisfying trilogy of games indeed, and if you've never played any of the Mass Effect games before, you're really doing yourself a disservice here. If you ever see the Legendary Edition go up on sale on Steam, and trust me, it will, do not hesitate to buy it, because if you do, that will be a 100-hour plus adventure that you won't soon forget.
Number 2.
Over the years, my initial wariness of RPGs has worn away to the point that I now fully embrace the genre. You just heard me glaze up Mass Effect 2 and 3 as much as I did, but those games are helped by the fact that they're third-person shooters. What I'm really talking about here are turn-based games. After all, Pokemon wore me out at a relatively early age, and since then I mostly stuck with real-time games until I got much older and realized how much fun I was missing. All of that is to say that I am glad Clair Obscur Expedition 33 came into my life when it did, because I think I'm at the prime age to appreciate it for what it is. Expedition 33 was the most talked about game of 2025 for a reason, and I won't say too much more about it now due to the fact that I want to make a dedicated video about it at some point, but I guess the reason it has stuck around with me so much is for what it represents for modern gaming. Sure, the gameplay itself is loads more fun and engaging than other turn-based RPGs that I've tried. The music is absolutely incredible, the story is captivating, and the visuals are an explosion of imagination on a digital canvas. See what I did there?
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
All of that is great, but what matters here to me is that it all came together because you had a bunch of rookies and literally brand new hires into the gaming industry. They just believed in a project so much that they were willing to sit down with development tutorials on YouTube and then just get to work making a beautiful work of art like this. I'm not kidding about that. The folks at French-based Sandfall Interactive had never published any major work previously or shipped any projects before Expedition 33. Because of that, Expedition 33, for all of its wonderful qualities, stands out to me because it was made by a team of truly passionate people who put their heart and soul into a very special project, and then when it was done, they sold it for a very fair price point of $50 and showed the entire industry that magic can happen at a significant fraction of the cost that AAA spends. It's both an absolute joy to experience and serves as a reminder for what human creativity can yield under the right conditions. And yet, even with how monumental of a success that Expedition 33 was, it wasn't enough to trump what was ultimately my favorite game of not just 2025, but now one of my favorite games ever. Similarly, it was also a massive achievement that came from a tiny team, literally 3 people, a small budget, and a drive to make the best game possible. Ladies and gentlemen, that game is They say that all good things come to those who wait. I had played through the original Hollow Knight on my Switch just before Silksong got revealed to the world in 2019. Needless to say, I was hyped out of my mind, and that kind of excitement is extremely rare for me these days. But then, months and even years went by before we heard even the slightest amount of details about how the game was progressing. You all remember how it was. Each Nintendo Direct would come around, everyone would suddenly get excited again about the potential of a Silksong trailer being shown, and then each time we did this, we came back empty-handed. But then in August of last year, the folks at Team Cherry emerged from their cave and announced that it was coming out in 2 weeks? And then when it did drop, it was $20, and everyone was in such a rush to buy it that Steam, the eShop, and the PlayStation Store all crashed.
Who's number 46,853?
Like, I thought something was wrong with me when I tried going on Steam in order to buy it that day, but no, it was a real thing. You just can't buy that kind of hype. I don't even think, GTA 6 would be able to accomplish that. But what does all of that have to do with me and my reaction to it? By rights, this game had every reason to let me down, because there are few times that I've ever been this excited to play a new game in my life. For all of the hopes and dreams I had for Silksong, not only did it meet those expectations, but it actually exceeded them. Exploring the intricate, dense, and massive world of Farloom reminded me of what it was like to first play Ocarina of Time when I was 10 years old. There's just something delightfully old school about the way Team Cherry quite literally drops you into this world and says, okay, you figure it out. Don't get me wrong, it was difficult and even frustrating at times, but the thrill of looking at the map, wondering, what's over there? And then finding out what was over there never stopped. It provided a deeply satisfying loop of discovery and reward that I welcomed with open arms. For despite how hard some of these bosses and obstacle-laden paths were to overcome, the tools to do what I needed to do were always in my possession. And if they weren't, I either had to change up my approach or just go somewhere else. People may not like that the game is designed in such a way to where you have to work within the bounds that Team Cherry has set, but for me, my mindset was always, alright, 2 can play at that game. Between that, as well as just trying to have patience every step of the way, the experience was always a blast. The fact that the game was so challenging but fair led me to believe that I really could make it to the end so long as I put in the work, and by golly, I did the work. Thankfully, the harder the game got, the more I learned and the more I was able to get on the game's rhythm. Hornet's graceful moveset and wide array of weapons perfectly meshed together to make her an unstoppable force of nature that felt so good to control, man. And let me tell you, the emotional reward is great for overcoming this game's difficult challenges. Take the Coral Tower in Act 3, for example. If you just Google that, Coral Tower in Act 3, you'll probably find a bunch of Reddit and Facebook posts talking about how much of a chore it is. It has gone on to be one of the most infamous gauntlet of enemies in the entire game, and that's saying something. But for me, imagine the absolute euphoria I felt after beating it on my first try.
Damn!
On the other hand, though, the long and tough journey that is Silksong will stick with me because it made me feel like Hornet, or rather me as the player, was truly a hero. She starts off only caring about her own concern of escaping Farloom and exacting revenge on her captors. As the game progressed and I fulfilled the various wishes though, Hornet's relationships with others naturally grew, and I became more emotionally invested in seeing Farloom's bugs overcome their struggle for survival. As Act 3 starts to settle in with its many twists and deepening of what's really at stake, it all kept building and getting much more somber until everything culminated in what is one of the most stunning and awe-inspiring finales to a game I have ever played. After obtaining 100% completion as a result of roughly 65 hours or so of gameplay, I can confidently say that Silksong is a gaming adventure of a lifetime. I can't say that I would recommend it to someone who hasn't played a Metroidvania before, since it very much caters to that kind of person who already has played many Metroidvanias and is craving after the best one possible. Silksong is kind of like the ultimate test of strength for people who like those kinds of games, so buyers beware in that sense. But if you're up for the challenge, you will find this to be a beautifully crafted work of art that may enchant you in the same way that it did for me. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and subscribe to the channel. For doing so really does help my channel grow, and I will see you all in the next one.
Mm-mm.